This is the August 16th special meeting of the Montgomery Independent School District Board of Trustees. Please, I'd like to call this meeting to order, so please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. All right. Ms. Alcantara, are there any public comments? There are no public comments, so the board will go into closed session for the reasons listed on our agenda. We will return shortly.
Look, mine says there was an error. Hey, do you know the password? I got that. I didn't realize that. Look, there was an error.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are returning from the closed session of the previous special meeting. There are no agenda items, so I'd like to call the special meeting as adjourned. And the time is 6:02. This is the August 16th regular meeting of the Montgomery Independent School District Board of Trustees. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending tonight. Dr. Morrison, I believe we have a couple of special recognitions this evening.
We have a number of special recognitions, and could not be more excited. I'm going to ask Clint Hurd, our Montgomery ISD Athletic Director, to come forward, and we're going to do the first of several special presentations.
Good evening, everybody. How are y'all doing?
Good evening, Coach Hurd.
Tonight is my pleasure to introduce the 2022 state champion Lake Creek Lions softball team that went 41-0 this season.
Go Lions!
This was the first time this feat had been accomplished in Class 5A in the history of the UIL. This team, which both excelled both on and off the field, this team had the district MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, and 10 players were selected to the All-District team. The team also excelled in the classroom by having 11 players selected for the All-Academic All-District team. At the state level, and this is going to be a continuing theme, at the state tournament we had the MVP and 6 players selected to the All-Tournament team. Ava Brown was selected the Gatorade Player of the Year for the state of Texas. In the Houston Chronicles All Greater Houston team, we had the MVP, Hitter of the Year, and the Coach of the Year. In the Conroe Couriers All Montgomery team, we had the MVP, the Offensive MVP, Coach of the Year, and 4 players selected to that team. In the Texas Girls Coaching Association, we had 5 players selected All-State, and Coach Roshinsky was selected Coach of the Year. In the Texas Girls Coaching Association, the All-Star Game, 2 players were selected to play, and Coach Roshinsky also coached one of those teams. In the Texas Sports Writers Association All-State team, which was a really tough one, we had the Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, and 5 players selected to that team. In the National Fast Pitch Coaches Association, we had 5 players selected to the All-Region team, 3 players selected to the NFCA All-American team. We also, and this is another great tribute to these young ladies, we had 13 players that were named NFCA All-American Scholar Athletes. The Lake Creek coaching staff was selected to the National Fast Pitch Association's Region 6 Coaching Staff of the Year. The National Coaching Staff of the Year will be announced this coming Monday. The Lake Creek coaching staff, again, it'll be announced on Monday, and we had 13 players that were All-American. And of course, the icing on the cake, the Lake Creek Lions softball team was named National Championship by USA Today. So congratulations. And that's it.
So, Coach, can we have our softball team and coaches come forward, please?
Oh, absolutely. Come on, ladies.
I guess so.
And I know none of this happens without amazing involvement of our parents who were so supportive the whole season, so engaged during the tournament and the actual championship. If our parents come up and join us for a picture, please.
And then last but not least, our coach, Michelle Galloway.
Oh, it might be. She was probably signed into the OneDrive to.
If I can say something real quick, Dr. Fuller, Dr. Morrison, I'd just like to address the team, and the on-field stuff's outstanding. 41-0, the state recognition, the national recognition, the academic recognition, which we have great pride in here in Montgomery. But how you guys carried yourself and the reputation, and in other schools, and what we heard about how y'all carried yourself, the sportsmanship, the great attitudes, the teamwork, that's as important as anything y'all did. And I just wanted to recognize that for you guys. Thank y'all.
Well, that's a great start to the recognition. So what's next?
Well, I think, Dr. Fuller, we're talking about regional recognition, state recognition, national recognition, and we have another both local and regional distinction to honor. And so I'm going to ask our Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Carrie Fitzpatrick, to step forward for our next recognition.
Good evening, Dr. Fuller and Board of Trustees. I am beyond grateful to be standing here and given this opportunity to celebrate a very special individual. In July of 2020, a recommendation was made for the hire of a paraprofessional whose primary responsibilities included supporting the specialized learning needs of students at Montgomery Elementary School. Very quickly, this individual became a cherished part of the school family. The most reluctant of students find comfort in her support, and colleagues continually sing her praises. To this day, her kindness knows no boundaries, and her smile is positively contagious. Last April, the staff at MES selected Lily Salas-Nino to represent their campus as their Spirit of Montgomery. On May 19th, Lily was recognized for her campus contributions and also named Montgomery ISD's District Spirit of Montgomery.
We are here once again to celebrate another success and award. It is my honor to share that our very own Lily was recently awarded the distinction of the Region 6 Paraprofessional of the Year. Thank you for joining me in celebrating someone who has a heart bigger than Texas and whose passion is beyond measure. Lily, congratulations, and thank you for being a daily blessing to Montgomery ISD.
Pictures. I thought that was just a board president picture.
Maybe not. Yes, we will.
And for our audience, if you ever want to see a prouder spouse, I don't know if I've ever seen one, than this gentleman over here who has just beamed since he was first recognized as the Montgomery Elementary School recipient, then the district recipient, and I think, fellas, he puts us all to shame in terms of how to recognize an amazing spouse. So come on up here. We're taking pictures.
If you don't mind, Dr. Morrison, I want to say a few words to Miss Lily right quick. Miss Lily remembers when we first met, it was in an aisle at Walmart, and even at that point, before she had begun working for the school district, I just knew she beamed radiance and just a great spirit. So Miss Lily, thank you for everything you do. But wait, there's more.
Yes, Dr. Fuller. Again, we are recognizing people who have excelled, who have set a standard of excellence for our school district, that have already started putting the premier in what they are doing and what they've done for our school district. So we're going to do a very special recognition now. I'm going to ask Justin Moreno, our Assistant Superintendent of Communications, to come forward, as well as our elementary principals. And Carrie, that still includes you, so come on.
Is it okay for Catherine Bartlett to come up as well?
I think it would be very appropriate.
Well, when I first met Dr. Bartlett, it was my second day here on the job, and Dr. Morrison said, "Hey, I want you to come with me to Lone Star Elementary School because I want you to meet someone really special." And that person was Catherine Bartlett. And when we met, he said, "And by the way, the two of you are going to co-lead a new strategic plan for the district." And while I was surprised, I quickly learned through my work with Catherine that he asked me to work with Catherine so that I can soak up all of the amazing qualities she has as a leader, as a school administrator, as a colleague, and most importantly, as a friend. And Catherine Bartlett is one of a kind. She is an incredible leader, and Montgomery ISD is a better place for her leadership, and we can't thank her enough. And as I know how amazing of a school leader she was, and a leader an amazing campus, I know she's a better softball mom. And so I know she'll be out this year like she was last year at every game, but cheering on. So she'll have a little extra time to fire up that Home Run Club Twitter page and go on Canva and make some additional graphics for the team. So I know I speak for everyone in this room when I say that Montgomery ISD will dearly miss Catherine Bartlett's leadership, and we can't thank her enough for everything she has done for Lone Star Elementary School and Montgomery ISD.
Okay, I do. Surprise! I do want to. I just want to say, and I have told so many people, it's the best job. It's just the best job, and I just happen to be doubly blessed by having the best job, but working with the very best people, with the little ones and with the adults, and with my people now who said, of course we knew it was on the board agenda, so that's the kind of staff we have at Lone Star. I just want to point that out again. It was just such a blessing, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to serve our community, but also for the trust that I've received from the board and all of our leadership team for the years I was here to collaborate with the best of the best, because you just turn them loose and they do great things. So thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Bartlett, you have left an indelible mark on the school district, not just for your work in the strategic plan, but also because of the countless hours and days that you've put into a lot of young people. And so on behalf of the board, on behalf of our town, thank you very much for everything you've done. One more round for Catherine.
I'd like to also say one thing. Dr. Bartlett, you've been an amazing influence on the district, leader. What you did with Leader in Me over the years and built that program, and what's happened at Lone Star Elementary, you've left a really strong legacy there. My wife worked for you, and she's always said great things. And sometimes it's tough to be a leader, but it comes with a legacy that you end up passing on to the people that work for you and that you have led, and I think you've done that. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have one more special guest with us tonight, a young man by the name of Sam Ingren. Sam, please stand up. Sam is with Boy Scout Troop 491, and he is completing a requirement for the Citizenship Merit Badge tonight. So I wanted to say a sincere thank you for Sam and his dad for showing up And also, Sam, please be taking notes. We want to hear what you think, okay? So, thanks for showing up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the business of our agenda tonight. Item 4, hearing for citizens present to address the board about the proposed tax rate. Are there any registered comments for this period, Ms. Alcantara? There are no registered comments, so we will move on to public comments. Are there any registered public comments? There are no registered public comments, so we will move to item 6, the consent agenda. Board members, does anyone wish to comment or pull on an item from the consent agenda?
Well, I would like to recommend on item C that we recommend Beth Prickrule for the TASB Board, Region 6A.
Okay. And since this is a consent agenda item and it is a recommendation, we do not need to pull it separately. Unless a board member wants to pull another item from the consent agenda, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I'll move to present the consent agenda as presented.
Mr. Kirby, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Turner, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed and abstained? The consent agenda carries as presented with that recommendation. All right, we are on to action items for the evening, and tonight we're going to do a lot with our tax rate. So I believe that's going to be it, Mr. Lynn.
It will be.
Good evening. Our first item up this evening is the consider and accept the excess collections for the debt service and certification of the debt service rate for 22-23. So this is an annual certification that is required by the board. This information comes to us from the Montgomery County Tax Assessor. And so the information is in your packet, and I would ask that you accept that information as presented.
Board members, are there any questions for Mr. Lynn on item 7A, the excess collections? All right, hearing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept excess collections for 2020 debt service and certification for debt service collection rate for 2021-2022 fiscal year as presented.
Second.
Minor point of order, I think we're doing 22-23, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
22-23 fiscal year.
Yes, ma'am, sorry. So the motion is for the 22-23 fiscal year. Ms. Turner has made that motion and Mr. Kirby has seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed and abstained? That motion carries unanimously. All right, item 7B, consider, adopt, and set by order resolution the ad valorem tax for 22. Mr. Lynn.
Yes, sir. So this is probably the less enjoyable part of being a board member, because the next two items you are actually going to set the tax rate that will be assessed to members of this community for this tax year. Just a few points as we talk about both of these items together. So item B is specific to the debt service tax rate. Remember from our bond campaign a few months ago, that is the portion of the tax rate that repays our debt. At this point, that tax rate is staying the same as it was adopted last tax year at 0.3743. An interesting point about that, remember, we have completed the first bond sale for the 2022 bond referendum. We sold $100 million worth of bonds, and you'll notice that the rate is unchanged from last year. So during our communications during that campaign, we told the community we could ask for less than a penny increase on the debt service tax rate. We are here tonight keeping that rate unchanged at this point. Future sales may, we may be back to ask for some of that less than a penny, but at this point, the rate remains unchanged from last year's rate.
Board members, are there any questions? All right. Hearing none for item 7B, is there a motion?
I'll move that the 2022 ad valorem tax rate for debt service be adopted and set by order resolution at 0.3743 per $100.
Okay, Mr. Kirby has moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Hopkins, seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed and abstain. That motion carries as well. Item 7C, consider, adopt, and set the order or resolution for 22 ad valorem tax rate of maintenance and operations.
Yes, so once again, remember from our bond campaign days when we were educating our community about the second part of the tax rate, which is the maintenance and operations piece of the tax rate. Remember, that is what pays for all of our daily operations. Pays for our salaries, our supplies, transportation costs, everything that we need to operate the district on a daily basis comes from that M&O tax rate. On the screen, you have a history of the Montgomery ISD tax rate. I would specifically point to the year 2018-2019 on that slide. You'll notice the red bar, that is the maintenance and operations tax rate. At that time in 2018-2019, the M&O portion was $1.04 per $100 of value. Since that time, the tax rate has steadily decreased as a result of legislation passed by the Texas legislature. And so tonight, the rate that we're recommending is 0.8546. So since 2018-2019, the M&O tax rate has decreased a little over 19 cents. So while our community may be experiencing increased tax bills, that comes from increased property values. The two portions that make up the tax payments that are due is assessed value, which the MISD Board of Trustees, as you well know, you have no role in setting the assessed value of our property in the district. You are legally prohibited from having an interest in those conversations. And so with the tax rate being lowered, obviously any tax increase is being driven by those property values, not by the tax rate being levied by Montgomery ISD. And so once again, just to drive home this point, that since 2018-2019, the taxpayers of Montgomery ISD have seen their M&O tax rate decrease almost 19 cents in that 5-year time period. So a significant duty by this Board of Trustees is to make sure that we are operating as financially efficient as we can, and lowering of this tax rate has had a significant impact on the lives of our community members.
So although, I have one question, although we're reducing our tax rate as a district, tax costs for our community have gone up.
Some of our taxpayers may be seeing an increase in the taxes that are due, but once again, that is due to the significant increase in assessed property values, not by any action from this Board of Trustees.
So just to understand and be clear, the delta between our tax rate and the taxes collected, that's driven by property values.
Yes,
so the question is, we don't see that money. Where does that money go?
As we have our conversations coming up with our community town halls and other information sources, I know Justin and Dr. Morrison are working on a kind of a Did You Know campaign to help explain the very complicated mechanisms of funding public schools in Texas. I wish I could give you a definitive answer as to where that money goes, but I can help by saying it does not all go to Montgomery ISD. We are not seeing the benefit of those significant increases. and we will be trying to educate our community on the complicated system and how our legislative laws impact finances for members of the MISD community.
Other questions?
Just real quick, I just want to make sure that we clarify M&O. That's based on our daily operation, our annual operating budget is what this is for, and it's dropped to 19 cents since 2019. That's our labor and day-to-day operations.
Yes, sir.
And that's a good thing to point out, simply because we're dropping our tax rate, we balance budgets, and we're trying to spend the money from the community efficiently. And I think we've gotten a lot of that under control, which has allowed us to drop the rates down. But back to my other point, I'd like to understand at some point in the future what Texas is doing with our tax dollars.
Right, and this is a good thing that the tax rate, our tax payers are seeing some relief from the tax rate. As the Assistant Superintendent of Finance, I have to tell you that there are some financial consequences and some impacts associated with this tax rate compression. That's part of the reason why we want to help educate our community, because things can't continue to remain the same as our property tax rates are compressed. And so we are experiencing some funding related concerns that hopefully our legislators can address when they reconvene in Austin in January. And we are having some of those conversations with them to help educate them as well as regards to the impacts financially that MISD is experiencing.
So, Mr. Lund, just to clarify for someone who's trying to understand why are we compressing the tax rate?
So the bill that was passed in 2019 called House Bill 3 had a mechanism in there that as property values increased above a certain percentage, then the tax rate was required to be compressed. So since Montgomery County and many other counties across the state of Texas have seen significant increase in assessed values, our property values increased above that threshold that was set by the state. And so that has driven the tax rate down 3.1 cents basically from last year's rate to help make up some of that increase in property values. Basically, the Texas Education Agency, they have a formula. Before we were allowed to bring you a tax rate for you to adopt tonight, they had to sign off and certify that this was the tax rate and do all the calculations to make sure that we were in compliance with House Bill 3.
So somebody watching tonight would maybe assume that the tax rate for Montgomery ISD is being compressed because our revenue coming in exceeds the state average for per pupil funding in the state of Texas.
If they made that assumption, that would be an incorrect assumption. There is a significant gap in the money per student that MISD receives in comparison to the average across the state of Texas.
What is that gap?
A few years ago, it was just over $2,000. Here lately, the latest data that we have to pull from was from the 2019-2020 financial reports, and that gap had grown to $2,700 per pupil. So as a district that continues to grow in student enrollment, that gap also continues to widen.
What are districts like Conroe and HISD getting per student?
I don't really, I don't have that information directly in front of me tonight. And it's really not about them. It's just how the state laws impact Montgomery ISD, because they're in the same boat we are. They don't have control over how much revenue per student they're generating. The laws and the regulations kind of dictate that. So it's kind of a little unfair to bring them into this conversation at this point. But that's going to be part of our Did You Know campaign and helping to educate our community.
So $2,300 is the current average gap,
$2,700.
$2,700
Yes, sir.
per student.
Yes.
And what do we receive per student today?
In 2019, 2020, that was right at $8,000 per student.
So there's essentially an average of almost $3,000 gap between our district and the state average.
In 2019, 2020, the state average was $10,810 per student.
Go ahead, Ms.
So
Porter.
the formula is not working for MISD.
There, it
sorry, I didn't
appears
want
that every direction that we go in Montgomery ISD, we face a financial challenge.
Yeah.
We have administratively, Dr. Morrison, our senior leadership team, our campus principals, the entire district administrative team have worked diligently over the last 2.5, starting our third year, to make sure that we bring a balanced budget recommendation to this board. That is becoming increasingly difficult as that gap continues to widen, because our pressures don't change. We still need to hire staff. We need to hire quality staff.
And we're in competition.
Employee pay continues to rise in surrounding districts, and so in order to stay competitive, we have to compete for teachers, we have to compete for bus drivers, we have to compete for child nutrition workers. So our labor costs are not going down, but that gap in funding, our revenue stream, keeps getting wider and wider compared to our neighbors. And so that's why it's so important that we educate this community how the system works and how MISD is impacted by the system. We're not trying to make excuses by any means. We just want to educate, and administratively, we will make the best decisions that we can possibly make with the amount of money that we are provided. But just know at some point there are things that are going to have to change.
Done a great job.
Thank you.
How much, so property values have increased, how much over the last couple of years?
You're stealing all of our good stuff. Since roughly 2013, property values in Montgomery ISD have increased 58 to 60%. During that same time, the MISD budget has seen an increase of about 16%. So I think that goes to show you right there that as property values grow, the perception is the district is growing their budget. Those two numbers show a significant difference, and help to point that thought is not completely accurate.
So state of Texas has a $27-30 billion budget surplus. So I would assume that our local taxpayers' money is going to the state, not to schools.
I am not educated enough
That's my assumption.
to be able to comment or assume where that money is going. I am qualified enough, based on my tenure in this profession, to know it's not coming here.
As the superintendent who presents the budget, to Mr. Lynn's point, I'm exceptionally proud over the last several years that we've presented a balanced budget. I'm exceptionally proud that this board has voted to make two things the main priority, and that is safety, as we've added additional police officers and other safety provisions to keep our students and staff safe, and then also to invest in our amazing employees who do so much to enrich the lives of our students and deserve to be compensated fairly for what they do. I think the challenge that we are facing in this district is that as that gap that has always been large gets larger, our ability to be able to compensate our employees becomes increasingly more challenging. And when the gap in compensation is a couple of $1,000s, many of our employees say, we love Montgomery, we want to stay in Montgomery. It's not worth a couple of $1,000s to go up the road or down the road. When the gap starts to be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, they have to start thinking about what's best for themselves and their families. And so what I worry about is a time when we have to make a decision of what don't we do? Do we not bring a balanced budget to this board for your consideration? Do we not greatly continue to enhance employee compensation so that we are providing fair and competitive wages for our employees? Or do we have to look at other things like class sizes to make the budget work? So it's a conversation we need to have with our community. It's a conversation we need to have with our state and federal policymakers. And it's just, again, that's what I worry about. And but what I do know, and I know I share this conversation with our board, is we are very pleased tonight that our taxpayers in Montgomery ISD will see some relief that they desperately need. So I think it could be a both and. We could be happy for taxpayers. We can also be concerned about if things don't change in terms of how we are resourced. There are going to be some very, very challenging decisions to be made in the future.
You guys have done a great job.
Mr. Lynn, I just want to ask two questions. So your slide that you're showing us, I'm just kind of summarizing if you don't mind. The slide that you're showing us suggests that we've always been fairly fiscally conservative with our tax rate, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so now, because of compression and kind of always being below average in the tax rate, it's kind of catching up with this. That's another accurate statement, correct?
It is, and your abilities to change that are limited.
It's especially hitting us hard in the M&O tax rate.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I would just like to make the last observation that I want to say is this is the only area I think we're really below average in is our funding level. You know, we have done what you guys have done in this district. Living on this issue, living on this amount of funding is phenomenal, and I'm exceptionally proud of the work that y'all have done given this constraint. And so I hope that we can look forward to future conversations about rectifying this, working on this, and finding some other solutions. But for now, there's an action item on the table, ladies and gentlemen. So is there a motion, or are there any other questions before we move on?
I would just like to make a statement, because this is an extremely confusing issue. And so what my previous statements were that the M&O tax rate is decreasing. Part of what this state requires you to do is you're about to make a motion that says property taxes are increasing, okay? So that's extremely difficult for our community to understand. Once again, those taxes are increasing due to the increase in assessed property values. The tax rate being adopted by this MISD Board of Trustees is decreasing 3.11 cents from the rate that was in place last year.
So, Mr. Lynn, I'm a little confused, so help me. Does this board have any role in determining the property evaluation?
Absolutely no role.
As a matter of fact, is it true to say it would be illegal for this board to have any voice or say or direction in terms of setting those property evaluations?
That is a true statement.
So what the board does get an opportunity to do is to follow the provisions of state law under House Bill 3 and recommend and vote on a compression of the tax rate.
That is correct.
So,
and TEA has certified by allowing us to be here tonight that we have complied with those requirements, and they agree with the rate that we are adopting.
So they are, in effect, if they choose to take this action, they are lowering the tax rate, even though the provision will say by state statute that taxes are being raised.
Yes, sir. I hope that cleared it up.
Not really, but
ladies and gentlemen, that's kind of one of the constraints we're dealing with here in local government and its relation to state government. So if that's not exactly clear as mud, I'll take a motion at this point.
Well, I'll move that the 2022 ad valorem tax rate for maintenance and operations be adopted and set by order resolution at 0.8546 per 100 valuation.
And is there, thank you, Ms. Porton, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Hopkins.
And I would like to move that the property.
we got to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstain? That motion carries. Now, I believe there's a second motion.
Okay. I move that the property tax rate be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of 1.2289 per $100, which is effectively a 18.10% increase in the tax rate.
And thank you, Ms. Borden. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Robb, thank you very much. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed and abstained. Both of those motions carry unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Lynn.
Thank you.
For getting us through that wonderful language this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to information items. Item 8A, the first reading of some local board policies and employment practices. Dr. Morrison, anything to mention on that?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Fuller. This simply clarifies the time for public comment to be 3 minutes. And we'll do the first reading tonight, and then the board will be asked to vote on this at the next scheduled board meeting.
Okay, so look for that on a consent agenda in the future. Item 8B, information item 8B, the employee and student handbooks.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. I will ask our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and our Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education to come forward. And we want to highlight the small but important changes in both the faculty and student handbooks this year. So I think Denise is going first. Oh, Dr. Weatherly's going first.
She's going to let me go first. Well, Dr. Fuller, school board members, thank you for giving us a bit of the agenda tonight to go over a few of the changes. They're more than just there we go. All right. With this being a non-legislative year, there were not a lot of massive changes that were done to the handbook. There were some recommendations, and so as we always do as a school district, sometimes we are forced to react to some of the things that happen in society, and so some of those changes that you will notice that we're going to talk about real briefly here tonight. First of all, on page 9 in the handbook, we added a portion that says if we go to some sort of piloting a learning management system, an LMS, and so whenever we were in COVID, we used Google Classroom, districts use Canvas, there are different LMSs, Blackboard, that different districts use. And so in the event that we have an LMS, we have to allow parents, because kids may come home, none of our kids at Montgomery ISD will do this, but kids may come home and say, I don't have any homework. So what we do, and the language that we put in the handbook says that we will give parents login credentials so that they can get on there and see exactly what homework their kids have. And so there are multiple reasons why we give access to parents, but they do have access to their kids' education, and so we put the language in there to make sure that that is reflected. Also, exemptions to compulsory attendance. One of the things that we learned from COVID was that the creation of teledocs, and I do believe that somebody in our SLT loves teledocs, and so telehealth appointments, as they may be called. And so we put that in there. TASB recommended that we include that as that being an exemption to compulsory attendance. And so with documentation, if a student attends a teledoc, then that will be an exemption to their compulsory attendance. A couple other items, and then we're going to turn it over to the employee section real quick. In the dress code, we did update a few things of that. One of the things that districts do is sometimes we have to react to some of the things in society, and we don't, unfortunately, clothes manufacturers do not always contact us for the latest, greatest trends, and so there are a few things that we improved our language upon, including part about leggings. We want to make sure that we're being modest with normal movement, and it gives some administrators some discretion with the leggings. Also, a couple other things. There were a couple of things that have come up before at our schools, most notably furries and leashes that you may have heard, and so we absolutely do not allow that in Montgomery ISD, and we want to let our parents know that that is something that we do not allow, and so we made sure to note that. Also, electronic devices and technology, we made sure that our language regarding cell phone usage in locker rooms and bathrooms was very clear. We outlined our consequences that come with that, and we know that we are in a social media world where kids like to always take pictures and put them on Snapchat or Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or wherever they put and post their pictures. We want to make sure that underneath no circumstances, whether they are good photos or ones that are taken without consent, in the classroom, in the bathroom or in locker rooms is not allowed. And so we made that very clear, and we also outlined our consequences as well. And then finally, safety. As you know, have begun our Stop the Prop campaign here in Montgomery ISD, and we have stickers everywhere on our doors, all exterior doors. Every door that somebody walks out of, they know, do not prop a door open. We do not want to expose anybody inside our buildings to anything outside an outside threat. And so we made sure that kids understand. We've also done this with teachers, but we want our students to understand that there are consequences for that, and we want to make sure that we keep everybody inside our school safe. And so we made sure to put the language in our handbooks as well. So those are the major changes that you see in the handbook that will be going home with our students.
Okay, for the employee handbook this year, TASB model handbook suggestions were not large, but I am highlighting a few areas that I'd like to make note of. The first is the employment piece on page 9 for our contract and non-contract employees. The Texas Administrative Code has had in place that the minimum number of days required to earn and receive a credit for a year is at least 90 days at 100%. And so we're including that for our employees to understand, and then also for our employees to note that an employee will continue on a probationary contract if a full year has not been completed. So if, for instance, we were to hire a teacher with only a month left in the school year, they would continue on a probationary contract. That gives our principals a chance to fully evaluate them and take a look at them for a full year. The second piece is underneath compensation and benefits, salary, wages, and stipends, which is on pages 15 and 16. I'd like for you to note that service records must be received by Human Resources on or before October 1st or 60 days after hire to be considered for salary purposes. And then finally, to let employees know that all employees are paid on the 5th and the 20th of the month this year and not the 15th. So that's an update as well.
Connor, I just want to recognize the picture that you used.
Let's go back.
Happened to be at Keenan Elementary School on this day where not only were all staff members wearing that T-shirt, but I believe all students were as well.
That's
correct.
correct.
This was through a donation of the school PTA to celebrate Keenan's establishment in 2017. So it was pretty special.
Absolutely.
And they're wearing their IDs.
What's that?
And they're wearing their IDs.
Absolutely. Thanks for noticing that, Ms. Gordon.
And next, continuing under compensation and benefits, I just wanted to point out our electronic W-2 forms will be able to be accessed through our employees' Skyward employee portal account. This is just an example of what is shown throughout the entire employee handbook this year, where we are moving to Skyward from Ascender. So our employees will make note of that. And then under health, dental, and life insurance on page 19, we are moving to Texas Schools Health Benefits Program and away from our TRS employee insurance, so that has also been updated. And I don't know if you noticed that, but that's Shelby in those classes. And then finally, under our leaves and absences, medical certification on page 23, the district requires that medical certification due to an employee's questionable pattern of absences or when deemed necessary by the supervisor or superintendent is required. And then also for FMLA purposes, that medical certification is also required, and that is currently part of our policy. And then finally, underneath termination of employment, resignations, page 58. The update here is under the section where it talks about a written notice of resignation should be submitted to the superintendent or other persons designated by the Board of Trustees. Originally, that said the supervisor, and that has been changed to the superintendent. So those are our major updates for our employee handbook this year.
All right, great. Let's let Ms. Minor off the hook first. Are there any questions for the employee handbook? Okay. Anything for Dr. Weatherly? I do want to note, Dr. Weatherly said it, the language about the video in a locker room, video on campus in general, is very clear. It's on page 52 of the amended handbook. Also, the language around the dress code is also very clear. And so I want to say thank y'all for clarifying that. We get a lot of that as well. So any other questions? All right, well then I'll take one more then, if y'all don't mind. Dr. Weatherly, would you kind of talk briefly about the cell phone use policy in a classroom and what that has been, and maybe if there's other questions from that?
Absolutely. Teachers have a lot of discretion to be able to use the phone as they see fit, and that also includes the phone. We call it electronic devices, which also may be an iPad. Most notably probably is the cell phone though. And so teachers, you know, if a student, especially secondary, deals with 8 different teachers, it's kind of like dealing with 8 different bosses. They have to learn how to maneuver through the day and what teachers allow and what they don't. Some are digital natives, some are not. And so we allow teachers the discretion to either use those or don't use those inside the classroom. And so, as I said, digital natives, some are very comfortable with it, some are not. And so the language that we put in there is to make it very clear that teachers do have the discretion inside their classroom to either allow them or not. There are some where there are certain apps where kids can take surveys and the teachers can get immediate results and information and feedback. And some teachers are very comfortable with that, and some are not. And so we want to make sure that teachers understand we support them whether they want to use that or not use that.
Great. Any questions on that?
I got one more quick in reference to discretion, not necessarily to electronic devices, but you mentioned something that we had to put in there specifically in the handbook called furries and how that's become an issue. And as we know, trends change, and that could happen again next year with whatever the next thing is. How do we handle that on an ongoing process from a discretionary level?
You know, there's always that little asterisk, I think, that always says administration discretion. And so it's hard to try to predict what the next trend is going to be. If it's not furries this year, I guarantee you it's going to be something else. But we want to make sure that parents understand we don't allow that in our schools in Montgomery ISD. We don't allow leashes. We don't allow somebody to wear a leash and then be led around by somebody on a leash. And so we wanted to make sure that language was in there. But I guess, you know, Mr. Kirby, what is going to be the next thing coming, I don't know. But it will be something.
Right.
I promise you. And so we'll have to add that to next year's handbook.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to be very clear, if it distracts from the learning environment, it does not belong in school, and it will not be tolerated in Montgomery ISD. I know sometimes parents see social media posts or news from school districts across the country, and they have different rules or different guidelines that they may follow. In Montgomery ISD, we're going to put our focus on instruction and safety and keeping the focus on education. And so if whatever the new trend is going to be, of which we don't know yet, and whatever the latest TikTok challenge is going to be this year, we will respond. So even if it's not appropriately labeled in the handbook this year, we will address it in real time.
Absolutely.
Questions? All right, well, Dr. Weatherly, team, thank y'all very much for that information. All right, moving on to information item 8C, report on cooperative purchasing and management fees.
One of our annual requirements is that we provide you with an update on our memberships and expenditures associated with purchasing co-ops. So that information is in your board packet this evening for your information.
Board members, any questions on our memberships and cooperative agreements?
And I think, Dr. Fuller, Mr. Lund has the next agenda item.
Yes, item 8D, bond update.
And one of the things that we pledged to do during the bond campaign, if successful, was not only to ask this community for their support for a bond, which they put a lot of trust and confidence in our district to move forward with a bond, but that we would update them regularly and often on the progress of that bond. And so to keep that commitment, more than likely on every board agenda over the next several years, you will see some update on bond. And quite a bit has happened, and so I'd like to ask Mr. Lynn to update this board and our community on progress on our 2022 bond.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. And so just to reflect on this district and the support that this community provides the district, looking back at the May election cycle, nearly half of the propositions in the state failed to be approved. 63% of the $16.5 billion of bonds were approved. The average approval rate since 2017 is 77%. So you can see that bonds for schools are getting harder and harder to pass. A real pat on the back for this community was that MISD was only one of 7 districts across the state that had all 3 of their bond propositions approved by voters. So I think once again that is something this district should be extremely proud of, and that support from our community that they show up when we ask. So as Dr. Morrison said, we want to provide you with some updates and some information. The early stages of a bond program are slow. As I've told people, it takes a while to get this train moving because there's a lot of administrative things that have to take place before you can see the fun construction equipment showing up and things coming out of the ground. And so as I referenced earlier, we did have our first bond sale that was held in June, a little over $100 million, and that transaction closed in July of 2022. As we referenced during the tax rate portion of the meeting, no impact to the INS tax rate at this time. Since the bond's approval, we have selected the architects that will be assisting us with each of these projects, Huckabee and PBK, and I'm proud to say that both firms have representatives in the audience with us tonight, so just goes to show that continued partnership. Even when they don't have anything on the agenda tonight, they're here to support us and probably to make sure I don't say anything wrong, but we've also been looking for land for Elementary 7 and our CTE and Ag Science Centers. Before we can build those facilities, we have to have some place to construct them. And so we've been diligently having lots of conversations around that. We put out a little bit of information regarding the Elementary 7 site, and we'll kind of talk about that here in just a minute. And I think the bond passed on May the 7th, Monday, or whatever that Monday, May 9th. This board had a board meeting, and the first action you actually took was to approve the first round of bus purchases. And so nobody can say that we waited long to order our buses. Unfortunately, that order, when we presented it to you, we were quoted a 12-month delivery time. So we're patiently waiting for that first round of buses. Hopefully, we will see some benefit from that order probably in October. One of our neighboring districts was in line ahead of us because they didn't have to wait on a bond election, and they've backed out of some of their order, and so we have slid into their place, and we hope to have 2 or 3, potentially maybe 4 brand new buses here sometime in October, so we'll keep you updated on that. What I wanted to do tonight, part of our initial efforts were to take all of the projects that were listed in the bond program and start breaking them into packages so that we could start working on designing them, getting them out for bid. And so I know y'all have been receiving a lot of questions about when is this project going to be done? When am I going to see this? And so I wanted to just kind of take you through some of our initial thinking regarding each one of those packages and some timeframes associated with them. And so package A, and these are, very generic. I'm sorry, A, B, C, D, E. We're just going through the alphabet here. But package A was elementary 7 and the addition to Lake Creek High School. And that package had to come out first because as the district continues to grow, our elementary schools are getting overcrowded. We need that additional student capacity. And the same thing at Lake Creek High School. We need that additional capacity. And so we have selected this board-approved Pogue Construction to be the contractor for that project. Speaking of land for elementary 7, we are currently in our due diligence period. What that means is we are performing tasks such as a survey, a phase 1 environmental study, and geotechnical borings to make sure that that tract of land that we are interested in is a suitable place to build a campus. And so our phase 1 environmental consultants will actually be on site tomorrow starting their assessment. We hope to have all of that due diligence period wrapped up by the end of September and come to you hopefully at the September board meeting with a recommendation to move forward with finalizing the purchase for elementary 7. To talk about the schedule for that project, we have already started some design conversations for both elementary 7 and the addition to Lake Creek. Please keep in mind that elementary 7 will be based on the Keenan Elementary design. We're using that as our prototype to help speed up the design process and help get us in that building a little faster. With that being said, there will be some changes that we've already identified to areas such as the cafeteria, the gym, and most importantly, the overall look of the building. We don't want somebody to drive by and say, hey, that's Keenan Elementary on a different piece of property. So we will make sure that architecturally and aesthetically it has its own look and feel, and they're not getting someone else's campus. But for both elementary 7 and Lake Creek, we will continue our design work from now through December 22. We will bid the project in March of 23, construction to begin in April, with an estimated completion date for both of these projects, July of 2024. Once again, with that lead time, that's why we needed to get this package out first to make sure that we can open that school in the summer of 24. So that'll be the 24-25 school year. So we have to get through this school year and the 23-24 school year before that school is ready to be open. Package B, CTE and Ag Science Centers. Obviously, we have affectionately referred to this as our crown jewel in this bond program. As we were communicating with our bond task force and our community, this is something that really generated a lot of excitement for this community. We will be bringing this board a recommendation on the contractor at the September board meeting. We are still in negotiations on a couple of different pieces of property for this project. But the project schedule lays out that we will basically be designing this facility for a year. So it's scheduled to kick off September 6th. We will be formalizing a design committee. Some of our community members, our business partners, this will be a very diverse group of members to help us go through this design process. And we will design basically from September through August of 2023, bid it in March of 24, construction to start in April, and then estimated completion of July of 25. So the 25-26 school year, that CTE and Ag Science Center will be ready to be occupied by students. Package C, this is our first package of renovation work that's coming out. It is for Montgomery Junior High, Lincoln Elementary, and Montgomery Elementary. As we were going through this bond process, we made a commitment to the Montgomery side of the community to let them know that their campuses were going to be an integral part of this bond program. And so our first renovation package coming out has those 3 Montgomery side schools in it. We will also be bringing you a recommendation for a contractor at next month's board meeting. We will be designing those projects starting from July through December. We will bid it in March. Construction will start in June of 23. Some of the work will be completed over the summer of 23 and will end in July. However, there may be some work that is not completed until December of 2023. A lot of the work is HVAC related, and so with long lead time items, some of those things may not be in place until the end of 2023. As we talk about renovations to each one of these campuses, it's important to note that that's when we will also be doing the technology infrastructure and the comparability project. So we talked a lot during the bond process about making sure that these campuses are comparable to their neighbors across town. And so we will be using some of those technology and comparability funds as we go through the design process for each one of those campuses.
And Mr. Lynn, just a quick note on that. It's very intentional to do the facility upgrades and the technology infrastructure at the same time. For anyone involved in construction, you know you want to get in, you want to get out. There's nothing about going into a building that's occupied that is without challenge. And so we did not want to do facility upgrades and then have to come back and do technology infrastructure, or to do technology infrastructure and come back and do facility upgrades. Doing it at the same time makes a lot of sense, allows us to maximize summer times especially, and to be judicious with resources and human capital.
Yeah, a lot of, we'll be in the ceilings replacing lights, and so while we're there, we can run new cable and not have to tear out the ceiling twice. Package D is Montgomery High School and the athletic renovations, and so athletic renovations could mean anything from the turf, the baseball and softball turf at both high schools, to some stadium work. And so once again, contractor will be determined at some point in the future. Design for portions of this, this is a very broad package, and so we will provide specific project schedules for both Montgomery High School and each one of the athletic projects. But in general terms, starting design in November of 22, continuing through March of 23, bidding it in May, construction starting in July of 23. Some work will be done by December of that year. But then for Montgomery High School, for example, some of that work may not be complete till actually July of 2025, because that's a major renovation of Montgomery High School. So once again, technology and comparability is a part of those projects as well. Package E, Stewart Creek, Lone Star, and Madeley Ranch. Project schedule, design in February of 2023 through October, bidding in January of 24, starting construction in May of 24 with an estimated completion July of 24. Not mentioned, there's still some other things such as security, Keenan, Oak Hills, transportation, and this building. We're still working out some of the details on some of those projects, but for example, security, it's not in a package because we're continuing to do those things all the time. And so there's not a specific package if somebody asks you for security, because we are making those improvements as we need to, and getting to each one of those as quickly as we possibly can. And so talking about Elementary 7, Justin wants to talk to you about an upcoming process for naming that school.
This will be an exciting process, and when it's finished, we won't be calling it Elementary 7 for long, because this fall we'll start a process with a lot of community input, as we always do, to name the new elementary school. It is specified in our board policy, the process for naming schools, so we will ensure that the work we do is in alignment with our board policy. And so our proposed dates would be to initiate the process In October, we'll release information to our families and alert our local media. And from October to November, we will put out a survey to take public suggestions for the name of the school, the mascot of the school, and the primary colors of the school. On the November 15th, during the board meeting, we'll bring as an information item the top names and mascots and colors that were submitted by the community. And we will have a final vote from the community in November and December and bring to you the proposed mascot name and color scheme at the December 20th board meeting. Following the board's approval of the mascot and the color scheme, a group of school-based stakeholders will work with our architectural design group at Huckabee to finalize the branding and the mascot. So happy to answer any questions on that.
Any questions? All right. Any additional updates?
We'll be
Great.
back next month.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. That's an excellent set of updates, and we're getting excited. So thank you all very much. Item 8E, monthly financial report, standard monthly financial report. Are there any questions? Hearing none, then I would like to adjourn this meeting.
A second.